But let me tell you what they do. The First Amendment will reduce our own budget. We gave ourselves a nice stellar raise, not salary-wise, but for our own budgets. And we're going to reduce that budget for members of Congress. We're going to disclose on the Senate website the cost of borrowing money and how many times we violate our own rules, pay-go. There should be nobody who voted for pay-go who votes against that, because if it's good enough for us to use, it's good enough for the American people to see. We're going to dispose of unneeded and unused federal government property, whether it's military, whether it's buildings, whether it's land, things that we don't use, don't need, but we're spending $8 billion a year taking care of. We can get tremendous savings from that. That's what any other right-minded person would do. They get rid of the stuff they're not using so they don't continue to send money down a rat hole. And we're going to rescind uncommitted and unspent federal funds. We have hundreds of billions of dollars sitting that aren't even in the pipeline. And we're going to borrow more rather than more efficiently use the money that we have. And that's the First Amendment. It's $60 billion, $60.5 billion. The Second Amendment is $59.6 billion. It's a one-year freeze on bonuses and raises and other salary increases for federal employees. They make 45% more than everybody else in this country doing exactly the same thing, on average. We're going to cap the total number of federal employees. We've added 180,000 federal employees in the last 18 months. 180,000. We're going to collect unpaid taxes from federal employees. We got federal employees who are working today that owe the federal government $3 billion. We ought to collect that money. It ought to come out of their paychecks. And that's undisputed debts. That's not the disputed portion. That's the undisputed portion of what they owe the IRS. Everything except DOD, we're going to ask for a 5% efficiency gain in administration. Do more with less. Everybody else in this country is doing more with less, except the federal government. And we're going to say, no, we can't do that. Why not? You know, it's interesting, on the Debt Commission, we had a good discussion with Dave Cody, who's the CEO of Honeywell, explaining that every year they do more with less. They spend less dollars to get more out. They have less people to produce the same amount. That's called efficiency. That's called productivity. Except we won't apply that to our own government employees. We're going to reduce non-essential government travel. It's billions of dollars a year. If we're in a financial pinch, and I'd love for somebody to debate me that we're not, why would we not limit travel to that's only essential? We're going to rescind money that Chairman Obey in the House recognized on the WIC program that's not being used. We're going to strike $68 million in UN emergency funding for next fiscal year. Most of the members of this body voted for an amendment that required transparency on the UN. We give them over $6 billion a year. 26% of the budget for the UN peacekeeping is ours. We pay for it. And yet, with an audit of their monies, half of their monies, over 60% of it was found to be fraudulent. So we pass an amendment out of the Senate unanimously that requires transparency from the UN. Except when it gets to conference committee, it's not there anymore. Now, I would tell you that the American people deserve to know where their money's being wasted at the UN. So we ought to clip that. We ought to cut that back. We ought to say, you give us transparency, we'll give you money. You don't give us transparency, we won't give you money. We're going to eliminate bonuses for poor contractor performance. Do you realize the federal government pays bonuses for companies who never complete their contract? 2 years ago, the Pentagon paid out $4 billion in bonuses to contractors who didn't meet the standards for the bonus, but they paid them anyway. Well, that makes a joke of the contracting process. It also makes a joke out of us that we would allow that to continue to happen. So on these two amendments, you'll have plenty of opportunity with which to make a decision on whether you want to be on the side of Madeline or you want to be on the side of the elitism in Washington. The group that doesn't care what America thinks, we know better. The group that says, we're not in an emergency, we're not in a problem, we can continue to spend money and not make hard choices. There is an emergency. And the emergency is our very survival. Our economic survival, our survival as a republic. I'll close with the following. If you study the Roman Empire, or you study the Athenian Empire, you find common threads among them both. The number one common thread is they fell after they became indentured in their own fiscal policy. They could no longer support their military. Their elected bodies refused to make tough choices. We're sitting there saying, Europe, you got to make tough choices. You got to get your spending in line with your productivity. We're talking with a hollow ring to our voice. Because if there's anybody that needs to get their spending in priority, it's us. I'm not against paying for the war. I'm not against supporting our troops. I'm not against the FEMA money that we need. I'm against us not paying for it. And I'm very disappointed that we had cloture filed this evening. Because what that means is the American people really aren't going to see how we as individual members vote on tough choices. I'm going to have two tough choices out there. It remains to be seen whether you get a chance to vote on them through the majority's ability to cut off debate. But we ought to do what is the best right thing for the country. And we ought to be able to come together and agree that we shouldn't abuse the emergency designation, that we shouldn't abuse pay-go, that in fact we shouldn't delay making the hard choices because the choices are just going to get harder. They're going to get harder every year we don't do this. Now's the time to start doing it. If we choose not to, then what we're saying is, Madeline, in your future, we're going to steal it from you. We're going to steal opportunity for a future like we've had and opportunities that we've had. We're going to take those and we're going to indenture her to an economy that doesn't grow, to opportunities for an education that will be limited, the ability to own her own home. All those things come around. And we only have 3 ways to get out of the problem that we're in. The first way is we can default. Everybody says, oh, no, you can't say that. You can't talk about that. Well, when Moody's is getting ready to downgrade our bonds from AAA, that's the first sign that you're moving in that direction. The second thing is going to happen is the Federal Reserve is going to inflate our way out of it, to where that means everybody that all their life savings is going to be debased and its purchasing power is going to go away or markedly be reduced. Or we can do the third thing, is not let either of those two bad things happen by making hard choices ourselves on what we need to be doing, by eliminating the junk, the waste, the duplication, and the fraud in the federal government. It's there. It's there to the tune of $300 billion a year. So when this extender package comes, whether it comes this week or next week or the week when we come back, there's plenty of money to pay for it too, if we'll just stand up and be counted, not as senators, but as Americans who would like to see the future bright for their Madeline. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.